Good afternoon, Nick F. Nelson, brandpreneur. You're watching Brand Day Live. Brand Day is where we take some of our brandpreneur clients and we bring them to the forefront and we introduce you to them, have some conversation. Today we have the remarkable Ed Gordon with us as a part of Brand Day Live. We'll get started here in just a moment. Please be patient with us. Welcome, good afternoon. I hope you're enjoying yourself. If you could, please let me know if your team live or team replay. Shoot me a little thumbs up, make sure you can hear me. Welcome to everybody who's on Facebook watching. This is my first time streaming live to Facebook as well. This is something that I typically reserve for my LinkedIn audience, but stretching ourselves a little bit today. We'll get started in just 1 minute. Thank you for joining. Brand Day Live. Again, we have the remarkable storyteller, journalist, award-winning journalist, Ed Gordon with us here today. AJ, I see you. Thank you for joining, sir. All right, why don't we go ahead and get into it. Good afternoon, Nick Nelson, brandpreneur. Coming to you again from quarantine headquarters. I hope everybody's safe. I hope you're at home. Hope you're enjoying your week. This week, we're talking about the art of storytelling. There is nothing more impactful to your brand than your story. The story, or your story more specifically, is the one thing that makes you absolutely unique. It makes you different than everyone else. It's your power. It's a tool that many times you just don't leverage for whatever reason. Right now, I'm in the process of working with almost 30 people as a part of a new service offering that we're offering with Brandpreneur called Brandline. And last week, we went into the heart of story of everyone. And people are beginning to realize that it is their power. I heard such things as, Nick, I didn't even know it was appropriate for me to even talk about my story. And it is. It's the thing that gets people to feel. And as a brand, you want to be known for something, but you also want to get people to feel a certain way about you. Story has that remarkable ability to do that. And there is no one that I would recommend more in terms of storytelling than Mr. Ed Gordon himself. So first of all, I just want to say hello to a few of you on my LinkedIn platform. Nicole, I see you. Eugenia, I see you. Stacy, I see you. Thank you for joining. Sharman, thank you so much. I see you as Team Live. Marion, I appreciate you. Diana, I see you made it. Thank you so much. Tanisha, we have a lot of people from our brand line here. Everybody, I say thank you. Misha, thank you. Mika, I see you also on our Facebook platform. So let's not haste. I do want to introduce a good friend, Ed Gordon. We've known each other for years, and want to welcome him into the studio. Ed, how are you doing, brother?
I'm good, man, considering all.
Right. First of all, how things there in Detroit, man?
Well, you know, as many people have been following this, Detroit has been hit hard. And I think, you know, what we have to realize is it's nothing but a reflection of Black folk getting hard, because Detroit is one of the blackest cities in America. And it shows that coming out of this pandemic, we as a people have to start to demand a better treatment. We have to start believing, to your point, that we have the power, that we don't have to just wait for someone to save us, that we must save ourselves. And so I hope one of the things we learn out of this pandemic is the inner strength and the inner power that we possess, and then utilize it in a different way.
No, absolutely. And I agree. And we're dealing with the same thing, as you know, here in Georgia, in terms of a difference of opinion, in terms of the appropriateness and whether or not it's safe to come out. And so many of my inner circle, we have chosen to stay indoors. because we just understand, the situation. And I'm gonna just tell you, like we say, until our mama Keisha say come outside, we stay indoors. You hear me? And I know you have a similar mayor there in Detroit who's very adamant in terms of just what's appropriate. You know what I mean? And I think that's what it all boils down to, leadership. But I want to talk about you for right now. I'm going to pull up something. Before we do, I do want to say hello to our audience, and I want to be mindful of them. Asandi is representing Team Detroit, so she's saying hello to you, my brother. Alicia, Cash, I see you. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been a couple of years now, man. I had a chance to spend some time with you, and we got your image refreshed a little bit, my brother. And back in the day when we could gather, we spent some time and refreshed you up, man. And you've been leveraging them quite a bit in terms of your profile. But even prior to us spending that time together, doing some, imaging work, we've been in relationship and we've known each other for years and have been, colleagues when I was doing more so entertainment. Mm-hmm. The one thing I want to know here is, very quickly, what's your story? Give me the story of Ed Gordon.
Look, man, I'm a little cat from Detroit. Born and raised there, who grew up thinking he was going to be either Dr. J or Bruce Lee, depending on how old I was.
Right.
Then I thought I was going to be a lawyer. Went to Western Michigan University, studied pre-law there, was in communications, and my professors said, hey, you're pretty good at this. You should maybe think about this. Graduated, did not have a job at the time. Found myself that first year out of college. The job I had was throwing the softball in front of one of my good friends' mama's house. We woke up every day believing, like we had a job, that was, what our destiny was. Mm-hmm. And I said to him, man, if we don't stop this, we're going to be 50 throwing this softball in front of your mother's house. So I volunteered at the public broadcasting affiliate in Detroit. My brother's old girlfriend was working there. She wasn't speaking to him anymore, but she still loved me. And so I got an internship there. And from there, man, I just worked my butt off. And they hired me, and circumstances came one day when I was supposed to do a small story. It was going to be the reporter. They were giving me a shot there, and the host didn't show up. And I had to host the show, and I've been going ever since. And I will say this, and I say this all the time. Had it not been for those people at that station who believed in me, who saw something in me, who gave me opportunity, who taught me, who mentored me, who, allowed me to think I knew far more than I knew at that time, I would not have had the career I've had. And so, as we think about our stories and we think about who we are, it's never singular. There's never one story. There's never a chapter that's only about you. And so as you tell your story, look around at the vastness that becomes your world at any given time, and appreciate those that help you, and even appreciate those, or at least note those that don't help you. And I think that, to your point, Nick, and I think it's a poignant one, everyone has a story. I've been telling stories for years, and I contend that you can give me any one single person, and I can find a story that people will find interesting. I don't care who you are. I don't care what your education level is. I don't care what you've done in the past, what your dream is. There is something unique about everyone.
Yeah, and I tend to agree with that. You know what I found to be interesting, Ed, the more I do this, is that a lot of what forms us as people happens in, our childhood. It's been amazing to me how much I've learned, and how people take some of that and it just unique stories within their childhood that helps to formulate who they are today. Do you have a story, from your childhood that, you can look back on and say, you know what, this propelled me, or this kind of shaped how I am today and even my life's journey?
Well, I think I have many of those. My father died suddenly when I was 11. He and my mother had gone on a vacation. I was staying with my aunt down in Columbus, Georgia. Mm-hmm. While they were away, was supposed to fly back to Detroit on a plane for the first time by myself. I woke up that morning. I had been a little nervous, and I woke up that morning, and my aunt was packing, and I said to her, I said, I called her Mama Jerry, not Aunt Jerry, but Mama Jerry. I said, Mama Jerry, I'm fine. I can go by myself. You know, I'm a big boy. I can do this.
Right.
I'm 11 at the time. And she goes, no, baby, I'm going to go with you. And I could see in her face something wasn't quite right. And so my uncle then pulled me aside and told me that my father had passed that morning. And, you know, I can still obviously vividly remember that entire moment, you know, when he told me, watching my aunt pack and all of those things. But I think about the other people who picked up the slack for me. I have a mentor who lived a house away from me. His name is Fred Hudson. To this day, I will be 60 in August. To this day, I call him Mr. Hudson. I cannot call him Fred, because he stepped in the gap for me and filled the void of me not having a father. But he was that father figure for me. And I think that there's so many instances. I can think of teachers, I can think of friends who helped either propel me at a time, or kept me calm at a time, or gave me a pat on the back at a time. And I think your childhood, particularly for African Americans who are just now finding, I was talking to Charlemagne the God the other day, you know, we're just now exploring this sense of mental health and what our history has done to us to make us who we are today. I haven't given a whole lot of thought to that kind of thing in terms of what my father's death meant to me, or, you know, what this instance, you know, in my past shaped me. But I do believe that all of these things make you who you are. I am also, Nick, I should say, a firm believer in, and I do not like when people say, if you could change anything in your life, would you? And they go, no, I'd never change anything. It's the thing that made me the person I am today. Well, hell, I would change a lot of stuff. Because if I made a right turn instead of a left, I might actually be an even better person than I am today.
Right.
But we know that's an impossibility. But man, if I could, I sure enough would. No question.
No question. And the thing about Story that I've seen, man, is that there are pivotal events. You know, I tell people Story has a middle, a beginning, and an end. And in there, there's always, any good story has some conflict and some struggle in it, right? And when I say it's an end, it's not necessarily the end, but it could be an end of a specific chapter of life or a period of life and things of that nature. But I've seen that there are so many people that just don't want to articulate their story for whatever reason. And I want to talk about that here for a second, but I do want to get into some of the comments on both Facebook and on IG. Saying hello, first of all, Monique Cleveland, I see you. Thank you so much for joining us. Victor Patterson, my brother, I see you. Rob Lowe, Stacy Wagner, and then Key, my fellow rattler, I see you on Facebook. Jamala and Robin, and everyone, thank you for joining. So there is a contingency of people that feel that telling my story is unprofessional, that it is something that I hide. I want to put out, you know, what I feel the world wants to see. What do you feel is the disadvantage of not telling your story as it relates to, I deal with branding,
right,
as it relates to how people see you and how you make them feel?
So today's world, you know, it used to be in the 50s and the 60s, and I contend maybe up until late 80s, early 90s, that this sense of, particularly if you were in corporate America, you wanted to be a cog in the machine, right? They wanted everybody to be the same. They wanted you to wear a blue suit and a red tie, and, you know, there was a way to be corporate, right? But today we're starting to see that change, and everyone has a story. And I think we're starting to embrace our uniqueness. I don't think Black people are doing that enough. I think we are a unique people. We like to consider ourselves unique, yet individually, depending on what your look is and what your approach is, we don't always like that. You know, we teach our children to be individuals but then we hold them back from being individual if they go too far.
Yeah.
And that's a mixed message. When you were talking about whether it's professional, I think it's really all about learning your audience. What's an appropriate story for this audience? What's an appropriate story for that audience? What should I leave out? Doesn't mean that you're not telling your story, but a story does not have every single aspect of your life. That's another thing. Brevity is important. Some people have to learn to tell a story. You know, some people go on and on. We
on and on and on and on forever.
And some of us are them. You go on and on and on. And it's like, we got it. We got it. Come on, get to the point. And so there is a learning curve for telling a story as well. Not everything is interesting. Not everything needs to be shared. And so I think you have to determine, particularly if you're owning your story, how do you tell your truth? How do you tell the truth? And how do you embellish it where it's a little bit of what we used to call a white lie, but it doesn't bend the truth where it's no longer the truth, right? So these are all little nuggets of how to tell stories. And it's important, if you're not a good storyteller, to find an editor, right? Because again, if you're going on too long, you got to find somebody to say, okay, let's curb that. I watch you do it all the time. You know, we don't need to know that. And you can't get mad at that editor. I had to learn that.
Yeah.
You know, in the news business, you take it to another producer or an editor and you think what you have done is magnificent.
And then they ate it
up.
up.
They want it. Well, no, we need to change that. And particularly in my early days when I didn't have the clout I have now and later in my career, when I just had to do what they said, or at least I would attempt to fight sometimes when I strongly believed it. But you've got to be able to humble yourself to allow people to really, truly edit you and, you know, get somebody you trust to do that. But you got to believe them at that point.
Very good points. Let me go into the comments real quick. Stacy says, yes, I love it. Paulette, yes, a story has a beginning and a middle and an end. Charmin, we grow up in homes where we are told what goes on in the house stays in the house. We need to have a cultural mind shift. We have to be more transparent so that others know, like, and trust and relate to us. So Vanessa agrees with your comment of brevity also.
Here's what's interesting about that.
Yeah.
So she's absolutely right about the cultural mind change. Black folk have been very close to the vest. Some things, though, I think don't need to be shared with the entire world.
Yeah.
Yet with the society we live in now, don't we do that with reality television and the like? And it's interesting because that line is so blurred. I keep telling people it's a misnomer. It is not reality television.
Nope.
Right? It is unscripted, quotes, television. But do not believe, and I'm shocked at the people who are 40, 45, 50, who believe that this stuff is real. So I say to folks, you know, again, it really is about questioning what's important to share to the world, the you want to share. You know, there's the real you and there's the you envision yourself to be.
Oh, say that. And a lot of it has to do with establishing a narrative. And I want to talk about that, but we have a lot of comments and I want to be mindful of the people that we have here. Ursuline says, agreed. We are unique individuals, but have fallen hostage to our own mental mindset. Hattie over on Facebook says, any writer worth their weight in sand has an editor. That's true. And Ryan says, I think many Blacks are taught and are teaching subconsciously to fear potential. Therefore, we leave our story to someone who would tell it for us. The fear of what if. I want to stop right there for a second. Part of branding is taking ownership. It's taking ownership of your story. It is controlling the narrative. Far too often, we give the power of our story and our narrative to someone else. And it is about crafting that ourselves. It helps us understand what are ways in which today, right now.
Well, let me give you the
And
best
we have so
example.
many people, we can craft our narrative.
Let me give you the best example of that I can, that people will appreciate right now with the time we're in. So for many people, even non-sports fans, they've been watching The Last Dance.
Yes.
The ESPN 10-part series with
amazing doc. Mm-hmm.
The truth of the matter, though, is that documentary, in quotes, has been controlled by Michael Jordan. So at the end of the day, in the true sense of a documentary, it really isn't, because the subject is controlling that story. So it's given us a great insight to behind the scenes. It's given us a peek into an iconic figure, but it's very much controlled by Michael Jordan. So the true story of the Bulls and Michael Jordan has yet to be told, because there was certainly bias in how that was completed, right? So what I tell folks is, what you want to do is, there are 2 and 3 stories. There's the story that you tell, and there's the stories that others tell. I tell folks who have legacy, particularly our people, listen, you want your story told truthfully. And sometimes we can't do that because we have blinders when we look at ourselves. But find people who you trust to help you tell that story. Blemishes are okay. No one goes through life unscathed. And frankly, I wouldn't be the person that I am, or as interesting as I think I am, without some of the pitfalls and some of, the scabs on my knees from falling down and needing to get back up. Now, I don't want to tell every single one of those. I don't need to tell every single one of those. But anyone who tells a story where there are no stumbles, that's not a true story. And we don't need to listen to that. It really is about life, in terms of how you, as Donnie McClurkin says, we fall down
and get up.
Right? Stand. And Marvin Sapp and the others who've told us these stories. And so I want us to think about, what's the best story that gives the overall sense of what your brand is, right? So it's like when you write a cover letter for or a recommendation letter for someone. I never write a letter that is glowing from top to bottom. Now, I don't necessarily tell of that person's ills, but when you say that this person is the best thing since sliced bread, they created the cure for cancer and they will solve the pandemic for us. As someone who receives that letter, I'm like, okay, this must be your cousin, your auntie, your mama. You want some truth in that, right?
Right.
So there's a way to tell a story that tells the truth, and in the end is still glowing, but has hiccups in it. And I think that that's important too, because I think that people get tired of, the brand of this kind of unattainable person. That had been for so many years our problem.
Yeah.
We kept reaching for perfection. We kept looking at movie stars and all of these folks and thinking that they were perfect, and they're not. And none of us are. And so, you want to find a way to tell your story in earnest, in truth, but make it real. I think authenticity is the best thing that a brand can be. When you really believe something is authentic, that's the one you go with.
Okay, let's stop for a second, because you're really talking good stuff, but I really want to get into the comments as well. One of the keys, and this comes from Crystal, one of the keys to being able to live your story and tell your story is open communication. All right. Tasima says, this is great stuff. It sounds like you are saying that we need to control the narrative. Is that true? Should you control the narrative, Ed?
I think you should control the narrative as best you can.
Right.
You don't always have the ability to control the narrative.
So talk to me about those times in which you don't. Those times in which your brand comes into crisis. Absolutely. Right?
But what you have the ability to control is how you react to that crisis. Right? Mm-hmm. That's what you have. I remember sitting in Johnny Cochran's office. Johnny Cochran, famed attorney, for O.J. Simpson and Geronimo Pratt and many others, was a mentor of mine. And I remember sitting in his office and he said to me, Ed, the only thing you have that you're able to control during the crisis is your reaction to it. And that has stuck with me forever, because at the end of the day, when you talk about telling your narrative, I do this when we try to get interviews with people who are in the midst of crisis. I contend that you can't control that narrative now to try to take that story away. Everybody's heard it. Everybody knows the scandal of the crisis you're in the midst of. Now, by coming out, you can help control how people perceive it. There's a right way and a wrong way. Take Gail King's infamous interview with R. Kelly. Mm-hmm. Not a good look for him, right? He did not control that narrative in a way that brought anything to him that was positive. So I think that we have a sense of being, again, authentic. If you can be authentic in the means of a crisis. So look at the difference between how Trump has handled this and how Cuomo has handled the crisis in New York and how he's presented it. Yeah. The truth is what Cuomo decided to give to New Yorkers. When the numbers were spiking and they weren't going up and the hospital was in trouble, he let everybody know, here's the real deal. While Trump was telling us this thing was going to go away in 2 weeks, it was just going to disappear. Right. Authenticity is really, I think, something that people forget about, because we're into building these stories that are shiny and glossy, and it's our selfie look, right? Who puts up a selfie of themselves that's jacked up? Nobody. You might take 100 to get that one you love. Right? But we all know at the end of the day, it may be a nice picture, but I saw it Wednesday and you don't look anything like that. And so it's cool to shine that every now and then. But the most interesting stories, the most interesting people, and the most interesting lives are those that we get to see you on Wednesday too, when that hair wasn't quite right. I mean, we all kind of seeing a little bit of it, now. I had to try to even cut these sides down. My Link Hayes was coming out, right?
Brother. See, I ain't got them problems. See?
Yeah, you don't have that problem. But it really is, Nick, in my mind, about being authentic about who you are, what you want your brand to be, what you want your business to be. Yeah. Your business and your brand is more than just the entity that is sold. It really is about who you are at the end of the day. And again, there's an authentic nature that I think makes people gravitate to that realism. And I always advise people to be themselves, but be the best you can be. That really becomes the problem. Sometimes we don't want to put the work in to be the best you can be. I know people who are far less talented in certain areas, but who will whip the most talented person because nobody outworks them.
Correct.
You know how they used to say early bird gets the worm and all those cliches, they were real. There's a reason your grandmama was telling you that stuff.
Right.
It's real. Hard work is real.
It absolutely is. Let's go back into the comments. We'll go over into Facebook. Ed Gordon is dropping some real jewels this morning. That's experience speaking right there. Very good. You're absolutely right, Kim. And this is amazing information. Thank you for this. As a woman, I tend to be emotional during a crisis. I feel that men are sometimes a little more in control during a crisis. Do you have any advice on controlling your emotions, Ed?
So the first thing I would do to tell you is that men aren't any more or less in control. We just act like we are,
just like we act like we know where we're going with directions.
Exactly. And that is stereotypical of how we see men and women often. Right. I think it really runs down to the individual. There are times that I have been hyped up and my wife was the calm one, and vice versa. And so I think at the end of the day, that's an individual sense of how do I handle a situation. I think, one of the things that I tell people in crisis, I can recall being on the air when some crisis was going on and I'd have 50 people in my ear and different pieces of information were coming across, and I had to be the anchor, and I don't mean the news anchor, but the anchor of the situation. Yeah. I had to be the calm one. I had to be the one who sat as chaos was all around. And really, it's just training at the end of the day, particularly if you're a person who is not inclined to be that way normally. It's not your persona normally. It's anything else. It's about training yourself to take a breath, to breathe a little bit, to try to find a way, whatever calms you, right? If you got to put in your mind's eye a beach, if that calms you, if you got to hum a little Stevie Wonder tune in your head, if that calms you, whatever makes it, a little less chaotic for you, find those little tricks. And you have to then believe in yourself. I tell people all the time, part of the defeats that most of us have stem from the idea of not believing in yourself, being too afraid to fail. We were talking about Michael Jordan in The Last Dance. Nike did a commercial some years back. It was a great commercial. It didn't show all of his accolades and all of his winning, buzzer beaters. It showed all the things he failed at. And you look, and it was a long list, but you looked at that list and said, well, damn, this is Michael Jordan. So if you can fail that many times and become arguably the best NBA player ever, it's okay to fail. It really is about learning from those failures and moving past them. Again, none of this is new that I'm sharing. None of it is something that, I picked out of the sky. These are things that we've been told since we were little, and generations before us and before us. It's really about finding ways to incorporate those nuggets that, your parents told you, your grandparents told you, your mentors told you, how to incorporate them within your life.
And it's interesting you talk about failure, Ed, because, a lot of the individuals that I work with, they're very professional, many type A. They feel they have to present themselves in a very perfect way. And they, quite frankly, get inside of their head, right? Mm-hmm. And by them doing that, they come across as very sterile. When I say sterile, it's emotionless. It's like it's vanilla, right? And what I've seen nowadays is that you have to have a little flavor, right? you gotta have a little flavor. It tastes better when you have a little flavor, right?
And your flavor might be conservative, but again, that goes back to authenticity.
Correct.
If you've got someone who's a conservative dresser, let's say, yeah, I don't need you to put on loud colors, because now the trend is to be colorful. You be you, and the colorfulness will come from you. Nick, you know me well, right? Mm-hmm. A lot of people think I'm very serious, because that's what I had to be in my career, particularly when I started as a Black man who was trying to do interviews with the presidents and the like. I needed a certain gravitas that, let's be frank, white people would see in me, but I always kept my flavor, right? The way I dressed, the way I carried myself, but I also tell people, at the end of the day, it's knowing your audience. The guy I am off camera, and this, is not the dude I am on camera at all. People think I'm very serious. I was 2 votes away from class clown in my high school. I'm still pissed I didn't get them 2 votes.
Right.
But that's not the newsman persona I needed to get to where I wanted to go. But that didn't mean that I couldn't be both of those people. There's duality in storytelling and in your life that you should embrace, right?
Yes. Yeah. And I'm so glad you said that, because there's duality, that doesn't mean that you're unauthentic, right?
Right.
Inauthentic. It means that there are many different facets of you. Like, let me get into the comments, and I want to go into that because I want to be mindful of the people. Great advice, Mr. Gordon. Train your mind, control your reactions. Sometimes you have to be quiet in the storm. Remember when someone would say you must wake up in the morning on the right side of the bed, because we have allowed those emotions to show up in our workspace. Tassimia says, I'm so grateful for this info. Doing the heart work is an ongoing process. Everyone is different, but when I'm able to mediate and be present, I'm not as emotional how do you regulate Ed and Nick? So here's the thing that I've learned, is that there are many different sides of you. You know what I use, Ed, as the Black NBA conference example. If anybody has ever gone to the National Black NBA Association conference, Ed, I know you've gone, you'll see that during the day, you will see the very serious side of folk, right? We're there, we're networking, we're shaking hands, or we used to shake hands, right? You know, we're professionals. But at night, when D-Nice come on, right, and blow the whistle hit, you know, you see a completely different side, right? And it's not that we are not genuine, but it is not one thing you have to be. There are many different flavors of your story and many different flavors of your personality. But I think you said it best in terms of understanding when to show up and how.
And Nick, can I just say this before I forget it? As I get older, man, I gotta throw it out.
Me and you both. We gotta say it when we remember it.
But you know, I think that we have to learn to be truthful with ourselves.
Yeah.
You don't even always have to be truthful with everybody around you, but you should be truthful with yourself.
Preach.
Yep. And too often we don't see ourselves as we truly are. And I learned this when I was at BET once. They had gotten rid of a vice president of news. And they asked me to, along with my duties on air, they asked me to fill that slot as an interim vice president until they hired someone. I never wanted to be a manager. It was never a goal of mine. Didn't want to be an executive of news. Didn't want to. But I said, okay, I'll help you out until you hire someone, which meant I had to call people in as an anchor. I was always a managing editor. So I had that job too, but that was a different sense versus a vice president. Man, when I would talk to people about their performances or what they did, I am shocked at how people sometimes see themselves. We had people who were late every day, who would tell you they made a call or they were in search of something when you know they didn't. Yet they saw themselves as a stellar employee. And I think at some level, we have to be truthful with ourselves, with our strengths and our weaknesses, because the only way that you become stronger is to either correct those weaknesses as an individual or find a way to shore those weaknesses up with a team or someone else. Other than my stories, I don't like details and dotting every I and every T with paperwork. I am horrible with that. I'm great with that if I'm researching a story.
Yeah.
Horrible with even things as simple as when you used to, have to save all your receipts for travel to get reimbursed. Nick,
right. That's not my gift set either. Let's be clear.
Tell you how much money I lost because I just didn't want to do the damn thing, right?
Yeah.
Finally, I said, I can't keep losing this money. I got to find someone to do this for me, right? And so you find these weaknesses because finding your weakness builds your strength, period.
Absolutely. Going into some of the Facebook comments, two truths can exist at the same time. This has come from Kim Walters. Who you are on camera and who you are off camera. The camera only shows you from one dimension, not your full totality. That's very good. It's like being bilingual. We are in duality. That's a very good way of looking at it. It's like being bilingual. And then on Instagram, on LinkedIn, some misconstrue authenticity with keeping it real. That's not it, right?
So that's a very Black thing for me, Nick. When I hear say keeping it real, what's real? Who determines
what's real?
What's real, right? So that's part of the issue. Black folk. I recently released a book, Conversations in Black, where I talked to over 40 of our leaders and influencers, and each chapter is a different topic, but we talk about finding new narratives. And one of the chapters is called, Am I Black Enough for You? And it talks about how Black folks still stumble over this sense of how we define Blackness.
Yeah.
And how we define what's real and what's authentic. There's some Black people that feel like if you didn't grow up poor, you ain't Black. If you didn't know what a mayonnaise sandwich is and sugar water, you ain't black, right?
Right.
The still thing about, how dark you are or how light you are. And I tell people, okay, if we go on with that, what you're telling me, if it's only pigment, what you're telling me is Clarence Thomas is blacker than Louis Farrakhan. Are you going to go with that? So at some point, that keeping it real, I mean, look, I've said it, we use it, we all know what it means. But when you get down to some things, it depends on who's defining what real is.
Yeah.
And what we have to find out is who is defining it. Sometimes, I've literally watched people lose jobs that they could not afford to lose, and it hindered their career. Sometimes you lose a job and it helps you. But I've seen people lose a job that hindered their career because they were, I'm going to keep it real. I'm going to keep it real. And I'm like,
okay, you want to.
They're defining real.
Right.
You're not defining real. If you want to define that real, then go start your own. I'll never forget Bob Johnson. And there's a great example. There are a lot of people who used to think Bob was Urkel and, that he was corny and he was whitewashed, and Bob was a gangster. Bob Johnson, you don't become as rich as Bob Johnson and not be a gangster.
Yeah.
And Bob Johnson would tell people, look, I'm not creating BET to save all of Black people. He said, now, as a man of means, I, in fact, give to more Black organizations, more Black candidates, fund more Black things than probably anybody I talk to. But I didn't build BET for that. What I built BET for was to become profitable. And that's what, now you can disagree with the programming, you can disagree, but you can't disagree if he's the owner, that's what you should do.
Yeah.
Because he told people, look, if you don't like the way I'm running BET or you don't like the programming, I hear you. I'm all for that.
You can leave. You can leave, right?
And build your own.
Yeah.
We're quick to tell people how to do things, but then you have to ask yourself, but could you do that?
Very good point. Going over a few final words before I let you go, my brother. I also like and can attest to what Ed spoke to. We have to label what courage is and what it looks like in a particular instance so that we know how to pull it out. Awesome point. Who is Black and keeping it real ? Right. In terms of Ed, final words regarding story. Story sales. You know this. You live it. You sell stories for a living. How can one leverage their story to sell themselves for their next? Again, you have a lot of people that they're questioning, what is my next? Where am I going? What am I doing? How can they actually leverage their story to help propel them or sell them into their next?
I think you have to find the best nuggets in your story, the things that make your story interesting. It's almost like, remember back in the day where we all had paper resumes, and some resumes gave you everything. It was full from top to bottom, every line, every inch, and then there were resumes that had space and it breathed and it didn't have every job you've ever held. I think that stories have to be told in a way that makes them interesting. And you have to learn what's interesting about your story. What are you trying to tell? What are you trying to say? What's the best way to say it? See it as something more of an art form than an exercise. It's interesting it's almost like a favorite uncle who you love, who comes over, or an aunt who comes over during the holidays and tells those stories, right? Sometimes it's a story you've heard 100 times, but it's how they spin it that makes it interesting. And sometimes you want to hear it again and you go ask them. They had no intention of telling it, but you're like, come on, tell that story about when blah, 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 because they found a way to make it interesting. And that's what we have to do. We have to find our ways to make ourselves and our brand and our businesses interesting. Not just tell the story of it, what makes it interesting? And in that, I think, going back to what we said before, Nick, authenticity to me makes it interesting. And now you've got to find, the best road to deliver it. So try to think about, those relatives that told those stories and what made them interesting. And that can be, a business story. It can be a personal story. It can be any number of things. Sometimes it's how you built that business. It's, how you, can I just tell a quick story and just very quickly?
Absolutely.
So when I was 20 some odd years old, graduated from college, a friend of mine worked at a small station in Michigan.
Mm-hmm.
She got an interview for me, and I was getting ready to head out to the interview. It was in Flint, Michigan. Everybody knows Flint now because of the water crisis.
Yeah.
Which is about 45 minutes outside of Detroit. I drove in my vet to Flint. It was a Chevette, but I called it a vet back in the day.
Right.
Light blue, orange gas cap, rusted out floorboard on the passenger side. So if you lift the floor mat, you could see the road, right? Had my one suit. I had one suit back then. It was still a nice sharp suit, but I only had one. Drove up there. I'm sitting outside of this guy's office. I'm a little nervous, got my knee flapping, and I'm waiting to go in there. And I envision that he's going to hire me that day. He's going to make me a correspondent in Lansing, Michigan, which is the capital. I'll cover state government. I'll be seen by CBS. I will be hired within a month, and I will then replace Dan Rather and become the anchor for the CBS Evening News. I got it all planned out in my head, and today is the start of that. My friend comes by. She gives me the thumbs up. I go into his office. My man says, Mr. Gordon, have a seat. I looked at your tape. Now, this tape was pitiful because I didn't have a job. So I was just coming out of college. I recorded myself in the studio at the university and cut in highlights of sports from Sports Center. It was not a great tape. He said, let me ask you, what did you major in? And I sat up in my seat and said, communications and political science, knowing that he was about to offer me this job. He said to me, well, maybe you need to run for office because you'll never make it in this field. Dude, he didn't say you need help in this. He just told me I will never make it. And so a few years later, I'm in the White House getting ready to talk to the president, and I see a phone sitting on the desk in the Oval Office. And I said, I should call that son of a bitch at Flint. And I say that, Nick, to say that I tell that story often because that is part of the flavor that made Ed Gordon's story. Yet, as you pluck it out, it is somewhat of a stumbling block had I believed him.
Right. Had you believed.
Have I believed him? And so all of these little things, think back as you built your business. What were the things you had to overcome? If you're selling yourself, don't be afraid to tell the time where you lost money or you felt because you rose from that.
Yeah.
That all makes your story authentic, exciting, and something that people can glean encouragement from and believe in you to say, wow, they overcame this and built this. Let me go to them.
Brother, we're going to leave it right there. Ed, I appreciate you for spending time with us. You getting thumbs up and fist bumps the whole nine, man.
Pleasure, brother.
I appreciate you for sharing your insights. Stay safe out there, brother. Keep on telling stories, amazing stories, advocating for us, and just being the remarkable human being you are. And hopefully, soon we'll see you back here in Atlanta, my brother.
I appreciate it, man. And for your people who've not seen the book yet, Conversations in Black, pick it up because I got my last book tour stop was in Atlanta. So
where can they find it, Ed? Conversations in Black.
Wherever books are sold, Conversations in Black, you're gonna love it. Just take a look at the cover and look at the people who were in it. And I encourage everybody to take a read.
Absolutely, my brother. We appreciate you.
Appreciate you. All right.
Before I let you go, want to talk to you about one last thing that we're doing. This is our initiative titled Brand Line. Brand Line is the intersection between Greek culture and personal branding. We right now have almost 30 people on the line, and we are working with them. Storytelling is a part of that, getting comfortable with social media, getting an understanding of just the right way to position yourself for online. What I've learned is that so many people just don't do it. I did a poll. I was talking in front of Coca-Cola a couple of days ago and had to be over 100 global people. And I asked this one question: how many of you communicate what you know via insights on video? 80% said they don't, right? Most of you out here, you do not. And so if now is a time for you to put yourself out there and tell your story, and to do it, it's leveraging social media as a way and a platform to do that. So if you haven't given it thought, I would definitely encourage you to do so. As always, put your brand first, put you first, put your story first. There's nothing more impactful or powerful than story. And so take the time to really think about yours. Ed talked about these nuggets and pulling out these nuggets. It's impossible to pull out nuggets if you really don't even take the time to think about what those nuggets are. So I appreciate you for spending time with us today. My Facebook crew, thank you so much. This is the first time we've interacted. Please, if you have any questions, brandpreneur.com. I'd love to work with you. And y'all have a great rest of the day. You take care. Brandpreneur out. Thank you, Alicia, for joining. Carmen, thank you for joining. Gerald, thank you for joining, my brother. AJ, I see you, my brother. Thank you, Tanisha. Thank you, all of my brand liners. May cohort 2020. I appreciate you for joining. Stacy Vaughn, I see you. Thank you. Sharman, thank you. Pierre, thank you. Keith, thank you. I appreciate you. Addie, thank you. Everybody, thank you for joining us today. Alice Walker, thank you. Hannah, thank you. Kimberly Minor, thank you so much for joining. Jeffrey, thank you. Have a great rest of the day, everyone.